How about this lawsuit? UFC, right? They got sued by a bunch of fighters over the course of a few years, and anyway, they got condensed into two cases. So this past week, and if you hear Johnson versus Zuffa, excuse me, it's Kajon Johnson. And if you hear Lee versus Zuffa, it's Kong Lee. All right. So this past week, a Nevada judge rejected a $335 million settlement proposal for two antitrust lawsuits brought against the UFC by a group of former fighters. And that is the Johnson versus Zuffa case and the Lee versus Zuffa case. Judge Richard Boulware also set a tentative trial date of October 28th for the Lee versus Zuffa case. So this past March, guys, this thing had basically been wrapped up. Remember, the lawsuits was going to be 894 million to 1.6 billion, but they settled on 335 million M's. And the fighters, they were like, well, that was 10 years ago. They weren't too happy, but I think everyone was glad to move on. But they're not moving on. The judge kind of looked at this and said, no. This doesn't work. Here's a statement from the UFC as to what their reaction to what the Nevada judge did. They said, quote, we obviously disagree with this ruling and believe it disregards the expertise of counsel from both sides, as well as that of an accomplished and expert mediator, all of whom have decades of experience in antitrust case law. It prevents the athletes from receiving what they argued is their best interest and unwinds an extensively negotiated settlement that, in the plaintiff's counsel's own words, another quote, would far surpass the typical antitrust class action settlement. And then the quote continues, and is an excellent result for the settlement classes by all traditional measures. Additionally, by taking the unusual step of denying the settlement at this preliminary approval stage, the judge is also denying the athletes their right to be heard at this pivotal moment in the case. As we have said throughout the process, we believe strongly in the merits of our cases and are evaluating all our options, including without limitation an appeal, and have initiated discussions with plaintiffs' counsel who have expressed a willingness to engage in separate settlement discussions for the Lee and Johnson cases. Mike, were you surprised when you heard this? Did you think it was a wrap when they settled earlier this year?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I'm obviously not super familiar with antitrust law, but when something like this comes together, I mean, I guess you've watched enough like crime television. When two sides come to a settlement and agree to it, you usually feel like that's what's going to go forward, right? You don't usually see it being denied. So yeah, this did feel like somewhat of a wrap. Obviously, it did have to be approved. They had to figure out the details of, distribution of payments and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very significant and interesting development. If we do go to trial, it's like we talked about many times, right? The fighters could get 5 times that 335 million, or they could get, like you said, 0. So that's definitely a little frightening if you're at that end. I don't know where I stand on whether this will go back to a settlement. It seems like both sides are certainly open to that type of discussion, but it's going to need to be something that is clearly on a different tier than what they came together this time around. And I don't know exactly what that means. So yeah, this whole thing is pretty interesting. I mean, Dana's comments about going to high school with the judge was also interesting and obviously timed intentionally, right? Like he did that interview with Kevin Iole, and that all comes out in the first 3 minutes or so. So he was clearly wanting and intending on sharing that message to muddy the waters a little bit. And I'll share, for everyone saying he needs to recuse himself and it's a conflict of interest. I mean, I only know so much. Again, Mike Russell, who's kind of a longtime MMA journalist, put this out yesterday, so credit to him for his reporting. But he said Richard Boulware did attend Richard Boulware did attend Bishop Gordon High School in Las Vegas the same time as Lorenzo and Dana from 1986 to 1987, but they ran in different circles. He was a year ahead of them, and he was the student governor and co-valedictorian of his class. So I don't necessarily think he was running in the same circles as Dana, who, as Mike Russell also reported, he only went there for 2 years, and he went back to Maine to finish his senior year of high school. So I don't really know how much overlap there is, but if you can put that kind of thing out there and put doubt in any jury member's head or anyone's head, I mean, I don't know what that'll lead to, but to me, that came across as very intentional and tactical, and who knows what type of dirty games are going to be played going forward here. But this definitely felt like an intentional thing to try to stir the conversation like we're having right now and put it on this and the judge rather than the merits of the case.
Mm-hmm. All right, Goes. What were your thoughts on Dana even throwing that out there? Like Mike said, do you think he's just trying to muddy the waters a little bit, or because I mean, as easy as he kind of can't remember if he maybe bullied him and Lorenzo bullied him, or what circles they ran, can't the judge say the same thing? I don't remember you either.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot goes into this stuff, and I don't think it really holds very much. I was really surprised in the first place that they settled. But when you really read into things and what was to come, it's a little understandable. I think they just go back to the tables and they'll probably come up with a better settlement, knowing what went down the first time. But you have to remember, like all these depositions and stuff, they have timestamps on them. Like they can only last so long. And I think they were getting to the point where they would have to redo all that stuff. And there's so many fighters that are just waiting to get paid. I would be shocked if this went to another trial. I think they just settle again, but for a larger amount.
Mm-hmm. Danny, what do you think happens? Trial or settlement?
It's so tough. I do think if it doesn't go to trial and there's some type of settlement, I think the judge also wants to see something more than monetary wise. Compensation for the fighters. He had an issue with the settlement because it was just straight up like, here you go, there's money and we're good now. But like he's saying that basically there's a case here for antitrust issues. So it's going to get very interesting. I don't think the UFC obviously wants it to go to trial because in the first place, they wouldn't have tried to settle it if they thought they would have had a very compelling case to, save themselves any money whatsoever in terms of, winning the trial. But I do think the judge wants to see more from the UFC, and maybe there's going to be some sort of compromise. We'll see how much the UFC is willing to do as far as like changing some of their contracts and some of the way things are being done today in the MMA industry. But I think that's what the judge ultimately wants. And look, luckily we have a almost identical twin in the sport of boxing, combat sport, using the hands. Obviously, there's some other aspects left out, but we've seen issues with them in the past as far as contractual stuff, and then we've seen certain laws be put into place so that no one holds all the power, and clearly that's what's happening here in mixed martial arts. So we'll see. I do remain hopeful that this not only gets the fighters maybe a little bit more money, but I hope there's some changes as well in the industry so that the powers between the promoter and the fighter are a little bit more balanced than they are now.
I'm glad you brought up that part. It's not just the money. It's the Sherman Act, I believe, is what's at play here. A federal law over 100 years old, and it has to do with monopolistic practices, they say, like monopolies, and limiting the competition and making it oppressive, I guess, for fighters to not just have the one option. So that is one thing that I think the judge wanted to, I guess, be a little bit more clear about. And I think what happened, guys, is the UFC has leapfrogged so much in their revenue that I think he said, whoa, because they're up to 14 billion, I think, when you look at some of the latest lists of what they're worth. And I think he just said, hold on a second. I think there's been more money here at play than what we were settling on. I think they were kind of like working off older numbers. I think that's what he's thinking. But like we've all stated, no one's an attorney here. That's just kind of my field. Every few months, something comes up. You read more about the case and you read more about different cases similar to that. But I think they will settle. And hopefully the fighters do have, I guess, more rights going forward.